everyone, Julie here. It's been so long since I did a walkthrough or tutorial, so I thought I'd jump in here this morning and do one. This is Concept of Time. This is a finished image, so I'm just going to come all the way back to the bottom, and I started with this one, which is a clock, which you can barely even see in the final image, but somehow that's just the way it goes. So I used quite a few Jai Johnson backgrounds here. This is one that I brought in normal at 96%, so you can only just see the clock under there. I also did using the elliptical tool just to put a circle in here, which I added a stroke, and I'll just do a different color so you can see. So that just did that through there. So just go and do that. I then doubled that, and on the second one I dropped the hue down because I didn't want it to be quite so bright. Then a big dob of paint just in the middle, and a curves layer which is set to multiply at 77 just to darken it all down a bit. I then brought my model in, which I extracted just using the quick selection tool, and then of course it went into refine and or select a mask, just to refine along the edges of her as well. I then put a little bit of a shadow in behind her. I added some wings, which are from Raw Exchange, Brown's Angel Wings or whatever the package is there, and then I just extracted those from the black background that they come with, and I did some additional shadows in behind my model. Now my hair still wasn't perfect from the extraction, as it quite often happens, so I just did another layer which was set to overlay, and I clipped to my model, and just with the brown paintbrush I just went through and did all the ends so that they weren't quite so stark. I did a slight medium blur on her face just to soften her up, and a detail layer. And of course the original one, I had an apple there, but I took that out and put the egg in, which is Foxy Squirrel extraction. So I've got a few of hers in here as well. So the original photos are mine, but pretty much everything else is from all over the place. I added a little bit of a shadow in here. I put in a smoke layer, which is also Foxy Squirrel, and the flower, which I just masked out on both that and the smoke layer where I didn't want it. Now I did do a little bit of a warp on this because I wanted it to I could have almost put smoke coming from her mouth onto it, but I decided I didn't really like that as much, just so that she was sort of like giving it the breath of life. Then there was some ivy and a drop shadow. This is also Foxy Squirrel. And then we had the scar. Now this is actually a piece of concrete that I had just extracted or cut out and dropped in over the top. I set it to overlay. At normal it's just grey concrete, but it just sort of reminded me of a scar, so I set it to overlay and just put a mask on it to mask some of that out. I then went in and I added the arrow. I'll just zoom out a bit, and of course I extracted the tip of that so that it's into her skin. I then went and added a shadow underneath. I had some blood splatters that I put in. If I zoom out a bit, I also added some blood spatters to her hair as well, so that it looks like sort of her hair is actually dripping blood. and then I added another slash scar right where the arrow went in as well. So I then put that original texture in over the top, but it's set to soft light at 43%. Another Jai Johnson texture which was set to lighten, and yet another one which is set to soft light at 100%, and another one, this is one of her Polaroid effects, but I did add a movement blur to it because I didn't want it to look so static. I wanted it to have a bit of movement and play to it, but I didn't like some of the dots on it. I found that they were a bit distracting, so I took them off. I then did a dodge and burn layer, so I did just a new layer so overlay at 50%. That gives you your grey layer. You can then go in and dodge and burn at about 20%. And I went through and I did all the highlights and the shadows, as you can see there, and really sort of added a bit more depth to it. Now I found that this dress was still way too distracting, so I did a brightness contrast and I dragged it all the way back. And yes, it's a bit clipped, but I don't mind because it sort of looks a bit dirty and grungy and horrible there. I then did a vignette, so just grabbing my lasso tool, I just come around and sort of just grabbed where I wanted it to be and did a curves layer to bring it down. I then added some lookup tables. The first three, this is tension green, and this was crisp winter, and this was foggy night. So the foggy night I dropped down to 51%, but the others were at 100%. I then used the channel mixer, which really made a huge difference. So I was pushing everything, so I was really pushing into the reds, the greens, the blues, and really sort of making a big difference in the colors there. I also used a gradient map. This is one of the preset photography gradient maps that Photoshop's got, just from black through to sort of a dirty grey to white, and I've got that set to 16%. At 100% it was just too much, although it's kind of nice, but I just prefer the more muted colours. I then did a solid fill, which is a dirty brown colour, which I set to exclusion at 37%. I could have had it more, but it just muddied the shadows up quite a lot, so I quite liked it at about 37%. And this is my final image. So thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.